Coming up on Network Africa, the United States issues a new travel alert on Tanzania. South African court rules lockdown restrictions in the country as unconstitutional. Plus, Lesotho's former First Lady arrested over the murder of the estranged wife of her husband, Thomas Tabani. Thank you for joining us this hour. I'm Layo Adegoke. Africa's coronavirus cases now stands at 158 and 30. From that figure, 86,034 are the active confirmed cases. More than 67,000 people have recovered, and the death toll stands at over 4,500. South Africa still has the highest number of cases on the continent with 35,812. It's followed by Egypt with 27,536 cases and Nigeria with 10,819 cases. Algeria is fourth with 9,626 recorded cases, followed by Ghana, which has seen 8,297 cases. Meanwhile, the countries with the most fatalities are Egypt with 1,052, South Africa 755, Algeria 667, Nigeria 314, and Sudan with 307. Now, the U.S. Embassy in Tanzania has issued a fresh travel advisory for American citizens regarding the coronavirus pandemic in the country. In a statement, the embassy suggested that the risk of contracting the virus in the commercial hub Dar es Salaam remains high, but gave no evidence to support its claims. It suggests that its citizens should avoid socializing and leaving their homes. The advisory comes days after Tanzania's foreign ministry summoned the acting ambassador Inmi Patterson to protest against a similar travel advisory issued by the embassy last month. Unlike many other countries in the East African region, the country chose to adopt a relaxed strategy in its approach towards coronavirus, avoiding lockdown and instead emphasizing protection of the economy. On Monday, Health Minister Umi Mwalimu said there were only 4 COVID-19 patients in hospitals in Dar es Salaam. Now, as many countries around the world find ways to live with the coronavirus pandemic, a recycling plant in Tanzania's port city of Dar es Salaam has traded paper for plastic bottles and started making anti-coronavirus face shields. These face shields are being snatched up by hospitals and health centers nationwide as the medical masks are mostly scarce and expensive.
In a factory in Dar es Salaam, these workers are busy cutting, sticking, and stapling face shields made from plastic bottles. It takes less than 3 minutes to create one shield and costs around $1. Before the pandemic, Zayda recyclers made a profit of approximately $37,000 a month from the collection and processing of paper waste. Its founder, Alan Kimambo, gave up his job at Unilever Tea Tanzania in 2018 to venture into waste paper recycling.
We were supposed to export some of the material very earlier, maybe February or March, but we couldn't do that just due to the lockdown. Like our customer in India, India was in lockdown.
Thanks to the manufacture of these plastic face shields, the company has managed to keep all of its 38 employees.
We encountered extra cost, whereby some of the critical employees, we are providing them with extra transport so that they would not, come into contact with, many people, so that at least the operations, would go on smoothly.
Data Recyclers has banded together with Tanzania's Recycling Association to create the face shields which are sold for around $2 each.
The first procedure is to cut the plastic bottles, the bottom part and the upper part. Make sure that you size it into very equal and not sharpened to disturb your face once you put it on. And the second step is to bind the rubber together with the elastic band. After that, you have to make sure that the elastic bands and the rubber are in a quiet positions, not to move or to later on strip off.
So far, we are capable of making more than 1,000 units in a day, and so far we have made more than 6,000 units. Actually, we have made and distributed more than 6,000 units, which is equivalent to 10,000 USD sales in just a space of one month.
Tanzania is starting to ease its lockdown. President John Magufuli announced on May the 17th that he plans to reopen universities and allow the resumption of sports and international flights if the decline in new coronavirus infections continues. Unlike most other African countries, the government has gone for days without publicly releasing their COVID-19 update. There are 509 confirmed cases and 21 deaths, according to WHO data on May the 17th. Meanwhile, Zaidi Recyclers continues to receive new orders from hospitals and health centers around the country.
With the coronavirus having thrown many African economies into a deep freeze, many governments are facing pressure to end lockdowns and travel restrictions so people can get back to their normal daily lives. But health experts say any country planning to reopen for business needs to do so gradually and based on science-based reasoning.
Many African countries and cities have been under strict lockdown and other restrictions for over 2 months. While restrictions such as lockdowns and curfew have helped slow the spread of the virus in many countries, they've also created acute economic hardship for a large proportion of the poor, most of whose work requires free movement.
We last ate meat a long time ago, and today we don't know what we will eat. Life is so difficult. I don't know how we will survive.
But now countries across the continent are starting to reopen their economies and lifting restrictions. As a result, governments face tough decisions on how best to manage this process in order to protect lives and safeguard livelihood. In South Africa, the country with the continent's highest caseload, the government has lifted the lockdown to revive the struggling economy and given citizens an opportunity to earn an income. Like South Africa, other African nations, including Nigeria and Ghana, are relaxing their rules despite cases still on an upward trajectory. Besides political considerations, many African governments are worried about the impact of the lockdown measures on the economy. Economic growth had been sluggish across Africa even before the COVID-19 crisis, which statistically has not hit Africa as hard as other continents. Students are back to school in Tunisia under strict health rules as part of a plan to ease lockdown measures and resume daily life in the country. Plans to reopen their land, sea and air borders at the end of June are also in the works.
Stopped now, but
However, the World Health Organization urges caution as countries in Africa ease lockdowns.
If you reopen in the presence of a high degree of virus transmission, then that transmission may accelerate. If that virus transmission accelerates and you don't have the systems to detect it, it will be days or weeks before you know something's gone wrong. And by the time that happens, you're back into a situation where your only response is another lockdown. And I think this is what we all fear, is a vicious cycle of public health disaster followed by economic disaster, followed by public health disaster, followed by economic disaster.
Experts have also warned that it may be too soon to relax restrictions on the continent that is the least affected in the world.
Joining us now for more on this is Gospel Obele, an economist. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Let me begin by asking, with the number of cases still on the rise on the continent, Do you think easing of restrictions to curb the spread of COVID-19 is safe? Gospel Obele, I was asking if you think it's safe to, ease the restrictions that have been in place to curb the spread of COVID-19.
Okay, all right. From a broader perspective, we realize that it doesn't look safe. But what has happened over time since the emergence of this pandemic on the African continent, especially the Nigerian economy, is a situation where we have not been able to localize our solutions / our responses. And it has become a case of emergency, being the broken healthcare that we have currently at the moment. So what has happened over the year, over time, during the lockdown earlier on in the year, is we had a rise in social vices. So people were locked down, but there was a threat, to security. Food prices were rising, and a whole lot of that. So the government had to relax or ease the lockdown restrictions because social vices were on the rise. So we found ourselves in a situation where we had to deal with a trade-off, and in quotes, maybe trying to pick the smaller evil over the larger one. But either ways, it's actually a premature reopening or a premature easing of the lockdown. But due to the nature of the developmental issues in the African economy, it's a threat that hits deeply at the livelihood of everybody.
Yeah, and no doubt the continent has a unique environment compared to other continents, economically, socially, even religion-wise. What really works for African countries, even as we seek to resume normal livelihood?
So interestingly, as much as there are several countries within the African continent, to be nice to also state that from a developmental angle, these countries are different in terms of economic structure and social structure still, and they're on different rungs on the developmental ladder. So what will happen is that each country within the continent has to look within, knowing fully well that one thing cuts across. It's going to be a deep dive recession, and it's going to be a long shot in terms of the impact on socio-economic livelihood. So every country has to look inwards and begin to take clear practice steps, that are science-based, right? Based on actual feedback, based on what is going on in country, and then using that as a strategy to help the economy bounce back in due time. So it's largely context-based, rather than looking at it from an African perspective. It's not a one-size-fits solution. Even within Nigeria, different states have their different realities and technicalities in dealing with these issues. So it's first to look inward and then to begin to use science and rigorous thinking to engage the process strategically.
You talked about, the economy bouncing back. A lot of African countries are already trying to reopen. How can they fully recover from the hiatus created from the lockdown?
I mean, it's interesting to note that recession has already kicked in. Trying to wait for 6 months or 2 quarters of negative GDP growth would be, further reactive down the line, knowing fully well that the nature of this recession or what we find ourselves in at the moment is more or less a double hit, based on the pandemic, and then a gross hit on global trade, whatever the resources or whatever is being traded per country, into the Western environment and the like. So that double blow on the recession means that it's going to be a deep dive or a deep hit on the economy. Reopening the economy now, to a large extent, a lot of African economies or households on the continent are survival based. So what we have now is an economy that has hit back on a deeper level of survival. So yes, people are still trying to survive, but governments of Africa have to realize that it's going to be a long shot. So on recovery, proactive steps have to be taken in terms of developing a recovery plan, and it shouldn't take longer than it took. For example, in the Nigerian case, developing a recovery plan now shouldn't take as long as it took for the ERGP. So these are critical issues we need to look at. How do we develop a pragmatic, proactive, and flexible, more importantly, flexible recovery plan? Because there may be, I overheard recently issues around public health disasters and economic disasters. So it's going to be a trade-off. That means that our recovery plan has to be very flexible in as much as it hits deeply on the socioeconomic and the livelihoods of the average African.
All right then, Gospel Obele, an economist, thank you for your thoughts on Network Africa.
Thank you for having me.
Still ahead on the program. A food delivery startup rides to the hunger rescue of Ethiopians under lockdown. Do join us again. Thank you for staying with us. A South African court has found some coronavirus lockdown regulations imposed by the government as unconstitutional and invalid. The case was filed by a community group, Liberty Fighters Network, who challenged the government's response measures announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa. The High Court in the capital, Pretoria, ruled on Tuesday that the regulations are not rationally connected to the objectives of slowing the rate of infections or limiting the spread thereof. It, however, suspended the judgment for 14 days to give government time to overhaul the regulations. The Cabinet has said it will review, amend and republish the regulations, but that the measures will remain in place for now. The country has some of the most stringent coronavirus containment measures in the world. Egypt, like many other countries, has made wearing masks in public spaces mandatory as the country tries to curb the spread of the coronavirus. Residents in Cairo found not abiding by this new rule faces a fine of more than $200. Egypt is the second on the list of countries with the highest COVID-19 cases in Africa, standing at over 27,500 cases.
Egyptians have been abiding by a new law of wearing face masks in public spaces. If not, they risk a fine of around $252. The rule is the latest in a series of measures, including shutting airports to international travel, closing restaurants and cafes, and halting schools, aimed at slowing the spread of the disease in the Arab world's most populous country.
This was supposed to happen from the very beginning, so that people can learn discipline and learn the rules. We are a country that needs discipline. We have to wear masks, so they protect us. We have to protect each other.
Egypt has so far registered over 27,000 cases of the respiratory disease, including 1,052 deaths. The country's population is overwhelmingly young, but its major cities are crowded, making it more difficult for people to socially distance. Since the law came into effect, police were not allowing people inside banks or metro stations without masks on in the capital, Cairo.
Today, people are following the rules. It is good that people are becoming more aware and abiding by this decision, even if the decision did not include a fine. People today are protecting themselves, protecting their homes, protecting their families. This is the best decision to have been taken.
The government had in May said it was going to offer cloth face masks at £5 a piece that were viable for use for 1 month. Egypt is looking to produce 30 million of the cloth mask a month to meet local demand, producing 8 million at an initial trial stage.
Food is an essential commodity, and for some under the coronavirus lockdown, it is difficult to get. But in Ethiopia, Ethiopians are ordering food online like never before. This has changed the fortunes of Deliver Addis, a small startup which was struggling before the outbreak of COVID-19. Now, it's a good, different story for the startup.
In a leafy Addis Ababa suburb, Henok Germer runs a communications company from the veranda of his home. Eating out isn't an option these days, so takeout has become the norm. Today, Henok wants to try some Mexican food, which he orders via a Deliver Addis app. One of the Deliver Addis's 30 motorbike riders picks up Henok's order. The rider expertly weaves his way through the city's traffic to get to a hungry Henok quickly.
A lot of things have changed since the coronavirus pandemic has happened, but when it comes to working from home in a safe environment and being able to order whatever I want from, it's really made that aspect of this whole situation a bit easier to deal with.
Many businesses in Ethiopia have struggled to stay open, but Deliver Addis, Ethiopia's first ever food delivery startup, has benefited from the lockdown. It was founded by US-raised Felix Segaye in 2015 and has employed more staff and drivers to keep up with the spike in demand.
Previously, we measure based on efficiency, right? How many orders is the driver doing, et cetera. And we've maintained that even while growing the number of drivers significantly. So as soon as we expand, we realize that that's where the market is. And then the next benchmark is to build more and add more people. And we don't see that subsiding anytime soon.
Away from the coronavirus pandemic, Lesotho's former First Lady has been arrested over the murder of the estranged wife of her husband, the recently resigned Prime Minister Thomas Tabane. Maisaya Tabane's bail was revoked last week, and Mr. Tabane has also been named as a suspect in the killing of Lipolelo, who was shot dead 3 years ago, days before Mr. Tabane was sworn in as Prime Minister. The couple have denied involvement in the murder, and the case has caused significant political upheaval in Lesotho. Mr. Tabane stepped down as Prime Minister last month following sustained pressure from his own party. And finally on the program, a new solar power plant in Mogadishu is giving hope of increasing the city's power generation capacity and slashing of bills. Beko, Somalia's largest electricity supplier, is providing relief to businesses that rack up huge bills from diesel-generated electricity, turning to solar for cheaper power.
Somalia's largest electricity supplier was already producing 8 megawatts of solar since March using solar panels bought from Germany and the United Kingdom. And this is expected to increase to 100 megawatts by 2022. The plant cost $40 million.
Currently, I can say we are not getting more than 15, 16 megawatt of solar, and I'm sure it needs more than 300 megawatt of solar, and people are, getting used to install solar power plants. Like Beko, we are the first company installed, the solar power plants, 8 megawatt, up to 100 megawatt we are going to, but every state, I should say, every, region, they are installing solar power plants right now.
Beko, which also transmits and distributes power in Benadir, Lower Shabelle, Middle Shabelle region, said the additional solar power in its mix had already reduced the electricity cost to 36 cents per kilowatt hour from 49 cents per kilowatt hour. Its solar panels now supply power for 4 hours per day to its 300,000 customers.
Nowadays, the whole world, they are going to the green energy, and Somalia is one of the best places to install solar power plants. Why? Because we are getting more than 3,000 hours sunshine. In Europe, they might get in less than 1,000 hours, and still they are installing solar. But in here, we have more than 3,000 hours. So it's a very good chance for all Somalis to install solar power plants.
Somalia, which plunged into civil war in 1991, has no national grid. Each major city is powered by private companies that largely rely on diesel generators. Officials say that at present, 85% of Somalia's population has no access to electricity, with 60% of them living in remote villages.
And that's where we end the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Adegoke.